There are those who like to photograph wildlife, those who like to hunt and fish, and all who just take pleasure in the sudden appearance of a truly wild animal as we hike, ride, or drive in Arizona's beautiful out of doors. Game and fish professionals have been at work for decades, planting the seeds of wise use of our wildlife resources and our environment. Join the Game and Fish Department on a short journey to investigate some of the ways we're managing our diverse wildlife resources and some of the accomplishments we have made. Together, let's celebrate the fact that fish and wildlife populations still flourish in this great state.
Arizona supports over 800 species of wildlife. All of these creatures depend on water or water-related habitats in some way. Water and its uncertainties have long impacted man, another species that requires water and often covets water-related habitats in our state. In Arizona's often harsh deserts, water becomes even more precious and its availability more precarious. This precarious nature of water has long been recorded in our history. This tiny pool in the Tanajas Altas Mountains is home for a variety of aquatic animals, but also provides water for other species such as bighorn sheep and deer. While the pools of the Tanajas Altas, or high tank mountains, provide life-sustaining water to the animals that live there, they also provided crucial water to seekers of gold crossing the Camino del Diablo, or Devil's Highway, on their way west to California in the mid-1800s. The rush for gold in the 1800s represented the last large pulse of travelers to follow the treacherous path of the Devil's Highway. They were preceded by earlier Anglo and Spanish explorers such as Diaz and Father Kino in the 1500s and 1600s. The 9 pools of the Tinajas Altas, perched one above the other in cliff-like granite, may hold up to 20,000 gallons of water when full, providing the last available water before crossing the Yuma Desert. Travelers often attempted the Camino del Diablo in the dead of summer, the best time to avoid marauding Indians. If winter or summer rains had been sparse, travelers might then arrive at the pools of the Tinajas Altas to find the lower pools dry. If too weak to climb the steep cliffs, travelers perished within a few yards of life-sustaining water. By one count, over 65 graves near this site offered testimonials to the precarious nature of water's availability in this Arizona desert. Much of Arizona's history that involves man and wildlife has revolved around water. Arizona's desert rivers were ribbons of life for the wildlife and people that lived in our state. Today, these rivers provide crucial water to the cities and farms of central and southern Arizona, including Phoenix and Tucson. While native people and wildlife depended on Arizona's rivers for thousands of years for food and water, the last 150 years of man's impacts on our state's rivers and streams has changed the face of Arizona's aquatic habitats forever. At one time, water-related habitats, or riparian areas, made up about 10% of our state. This included the riparian communities associated with our 5 large river systems, the Colorado, Gila, Salt, Verde, and San Pedro, small natural lakes, and numerous streams and springs statewide. Riparian areas provide a lush, cool respite from the harsh desert environment. Wildlife depends on these habitats for food, water, and shelter. Over 75% of our wildlife species depend on riparian areas sometime during their life cycle. Today, over 90% of our desert riparian areas have been destroyed, altered, or degraded. This loss can be largely attributed to human activity. Let's explore the past and present history of Arizona's desert rivers and how they relate to wildlife and man. Not surprisingly, it was Arizona's aquatic resources and wildlife that brought one of the earliest groups of white men here, the beaver trappers and mountain men. James Ohio Patty and 13 other beaver trappers entered what is now Arizona in late December of 1824 from New Mexico by following the Gila River. Patty's personal journal, published in 1831, gives us a glimpse of the wonders of Arizona at that time.
March 3, 1825. We trapped along down a small stream that empties into the Gila on the south side, having its head in a southwest direction. It being very remarkable for the number of its beavers, we gave it the name of Beaver River. At this place we collected 200 skins. On the 25th we returned to Beaver River. About 6 miles up the stream we stopped to set our traps. We had pitched our camp near the bank of the river in a thick grove of timber, extending about 100 yards in width. Behind the timber was a narrow plain of about the same width. And still further on was a high hill, to which I repaired to watch my horses and descry whatever might pass in the distance. Immediately back of the hill, I discovered a small lake by the noise made by the ducks and geese on it. Looking more attentively, I remarked what gave me much more satisfaction, that is to say, 3 beaver lodges.
Patty further described his Beaver River and its environs.
Its banks are still plentifully timbered with cottonwood and willow. The bottoms on each side afford a fine soil for cultivation. From these bottoms the hills rise to an enormous height, and their summits are covered with perpetual snow. In these bottoms are great numbers of wild hogs, of a species entirely different from our domestic swine. They are fox-colored, with their navel on their back, towards the back part of their bodies. The hoof of their hind feet has but one dew claw, and they yield an odor not less offensive than that of our polecat. The country presents the aspect of having been once settled at some remote period of the past. Great quantities of broken pottery are scattered over the ground, and there are distinct traces of ditches and stone walls, some of them as high as a man's breast, with very broad foundations. A species of tree which I had never seen before here arrested my attention. It grows to the height of 40 or 50 feet. The top is cone-shaped and almost without foliage. The bark resembles that of the prickly pear, and the body is covered with thorns. I have seen some 3 feet in diameter at the root and throwing up 12 distinct traps.
James Ohio Patty describes similar scenes as he trapped the Gila, Salt, Verde, Colorado, and San Francisco rivers. Arizona has changed greatly since Patty was here in the 1820s. Patty's Beaver River is today called the San Pedro. The hill that Patty climbed was Malapai Hill, located just south of the town of Winkleman. The lake that Patty describes with beaver dams and waterfowl no longer exists, and much of the San Pedro no longer runs year-round. Beaver are no longer found in the reaches of the San Pedro, the river that Patty named Beaver River because of their abundance. Much of the cottonwood and willow community has disappeared or been replaced by the introduced invader, tamarisk. Javelina, described by Patty as only occurring in the river bottoms of the southeastern part of the state, have greatly expanded their range and today are found in most of southern and central Arizona. Since wildlife can only survive where adequate habitat exists to meet its needs, the distribution of a given species of wildlife is often an indication of the quality and quantity of available habitat. While the range of the javelina has greatly expanded, beaver today are found in much lower numbers in scattered populations across our state. The fate of the beaver in Arizona is a reflection of the changes in its habitat. The loss of much of the riparian habitat along our desert rivers has led to only sporadic beaver distribution. The beaver is one of only a handful of truly aquatic mammals that make their home in Arizona. Beaver depend on the aquatic environment for food, water, and shelter. Beavers are herbivores or plant eaters. In Arizona, they feed on the bark and leaves of the cottonwood, willow, aspen, and other water-associated plants for food. Trees cut down for food are often also used to construct dens and lodges. The beaver is uniquely adapted to living in the aquatic environment with its webbed feet, thick, dense coat, and prodigious swimming abilities. With the exception of man, probably no other animal impacts its physical environment more than the beaver. By damming running water to create small ponds, backwaters, and marshy areas, beavers help create and maintain additional aquatic habitat for other aquatic species, such as waterfowl, fishes, frogs, and muskrats. In our Arizona desert rivers, beavers probably help lessen flooding and maintain a moister river ecosystem by providing water retention and storage areas in beaver ponds and marshes. Water velocity and volume in times of flooding were reduced by the presence and activity of beavers along waterways. The loss of the beaver from much of our desert river habitats no doubt contributed to the degradation of these ecosystems.
Another species of wildlife that historically occurred in the same riverine environments in Arizona's desert rivers as the beaver was a uniquely western species of fish, the Colorado pike minnow. The Colorado pike minnow once occurred in the Colorado, Salt, Gila, Verde, and San Pedro River drainages. It was the top predator in the aquatic food chain. Because of its migratory nature, the pike minnow was commonly known as the Colorado salmon or white salmon. Colorado pike minnow probably spawned in early summer in Arizona's warm desert rivers. Pike minnow have been known to travel considerably more than 100 miles up or downstream to spawning areas. Pike minnow are undoubtedly long-lived, not reaching sexual maturity until at least 6 years of age. These large fish may live 50 years or more. Pike minnow in Arizona's desert rivers probably did not spawn every year, depending on water flow and temperature conditions. Like many species that live in desert habitats, they were adapted for flexibility, meaning they could take advantage of good conditions and not waste their reproductive energy when conditions were poor. The pike minnow was a unique and spectacular part of Arizona's aquatic environment. The Salt River, one of Arizona's major rivers, was historically a stronghold of the beaver and pike minnow. The Salt begins in the mountains in eastern Arizona and flows across the center of our state from east to west to join with the Gila, which flows to join with the Colorado. The Salt was a spectacular desert river system. The infant town of Phoenix grew up on the banks and floodplains of the Salt River. Imagine a river running through the city of Phoenix, complete with a fishery that included 14 native species, the most spectacular being the Colorado pike minnow, the world's largest minnow. As a top predator of the Salt River, it grew to lengths of 6 feet and weights of 100 pounds. The Colorado pike minnow and other native fish, such as the razorback sucker, have been utilized by humans for food along the Salt, Gila, Verde, and Colorado rivers for more than 2,000 years. Newspaper accounts from the turn of the century provide us a perspective on the abundance of the Colorado pike minnow, razorback sucker, and other native fishes in the Salt River as it flowed through Phoenix.
The Phoenix Herald, May 22, 1888. This is the season when fish in the Salt River migrate to the headwaters to spawn, and the great dam of the Arizona Canal Company, which stretches across the river at its entrance into the valley, puts them readily out. They are of all sizes, from a few inches to 3 to 4 feet in length, and many are caught at this time by holding a large scoop net close to the foot of the fall to receive them as they drop back after their futile leap. Arizona Gazette, May 26, 1897. The river near the dam is reported to be teeming with fish, which are swarming up the river in large numbers to spawn. Fishing excursions are becoming popular as almost every day a party is formed to go to the dam to enjoy a couple of days' recreation with rod and reel.
However, even by the late 1800s, the ecology of Arizona's desert rivers, including the Salt, had greatly changed. The resolution of Indian conflicts, coupled with the expansion of the railroad and the westward movement of settlers in the 1880s, led to increased human activities that greatly impacted Arizona's desert river ecosystems. Mining activities demanded huge quantities of cordwood cut from the river bottoms to fire smelters. Cottonwood trees were cut to build homes, and the resulting cleared land was farmed. Rivers and streams were diverted to irrigate surrounding lands. Cattle and other livestock numbers expanded rapidly and often concentrated in aquatic habitats where food and water were most abundant. In 1883, there were less than 100,000 cattle in southeastern Arizona. By 1890, this number had increased to over 235,000 animals. A severe drought cycle in the late 1880s led to enormous livestock losses. In some areas, up to 75% of the cattle died. When the rains finally came, they caused catastrophic flooding along Arizona's desert rivers. The burgeoning towns of Tempe, Tucson, and Yuma, located along the Salt, Santa Cruz, and Colorado rivers respectively, all suffered heavy flood damage. The loss of the beaver and its dams and ponds, which worked to slow down floodwaters, combined with river bottoms and stream channels denuded of vegetation from overgrazing, mining, and farming activities. This led to increased and more rapid water flows, which cut channels and began a cycle of catastrophic flooding which continues today. The diary of Sadie Martin, whose family settled on the Gila River, about 10 miles below Agua Caliente, is testimony to the instability of the Gila River during the late 1800s.
Father had taken plenty of time to consider the site for the new home. He did not want to build too close to the river, the mischievous Gila, that had a reputation for changing its banks in heavy rain. He did not want to build too close to the road, so he chose a beautiful spot about half a mile from the river and the same distance from the main road. In February of that year, the treacherous river ran true to form. In fact, it outdid itself. We had been notified that the river was on a rampage, but we had no idea that the floodwaters would reach us so quickly or run so high. We went up on higher land and camped under a mesquite tree for 3 weeks. The river was 3 miles wide, I was told, and it certainly looked it. We saw all sorts of things floating down the stream. There were great haystacks, little shacks, wood piles. As the water receded, the ground began to cave, sometimes 6 feet at a time. Every foot of Father's land caved off into the river and about a quarter of John's. Our house, though still standing, was right near the edge of the bank, now 6 feet above the riverbed.
The water demands for residential and farming for a rapidly growing Phoenix and the need for flood control led to the construction of Roosevelt Dam on the Salt River in 1913.
The decline of the pike minnow and other native fishes in the Salt River could well have begun in the late 1800s as the ecology of desert rivers was impacted by man's activity.
The construction of dams on the Salt, Verde, and Lower Colorado greatly impacted and changed the habitats that the native fishes of those rivers evolved with. The native fishes that evolved in these waters were well adapted to the extremes of desert river ecosystems. Damming of these rivers changed warm, often slow-running, silt-laden waters to clear, cold, fast-running waters. Seasonal flow patterns were also greatly affected and changed. The habitat in which these native species evolved suddenly began changing at a rate much faster than these species could adapt. Another great change was the introduction of over 55 non-native fish species into Arizona in the last 100 years. A 1928 report in Arizona Wildlife tells of 67,000 trout planted below Roosevelt Dam in Salt River. Today, the Salt River supports over 25 non-native species of fishes. We do not completely understand what caused the decline of native fishes in Arizona's rivers, but undoubtedly habitat change due to damming and introduction of non-native species had a significant impact.
8 of the 14 fishes native to the Salt River system are currently listed as federally threatened or endangered. Pike minnow were largely eliminated in the state by about 1970, but today are being reintroduced into the Salt and Gila River drainages.
However, since many non-native fishes continue to occupy these waters and habitat changes have been considerable and ongoing, the future of this species in Arizona remains uncertain.
The current status of the pike minnow, beaver, and many other aquatic animals in Arizona is a reflection of the quality and availability of their habitat.
Today, the Gila, Colorado, Salt, and Verde rivers are dammed, and much of the riparian forest has been lost. Lowering of the water table and diversion of water for irrigation has led to the drying up of many of Arizona's smaller rivers, such as the Santa Cruz, which today largely runs only in times of flooding, and the San Pedro, which runs only intermittently. This photo, taken in the late 1800s from Tumamoc Hill near Tucson, shows the Santa Cruz as it was before the turn of the century. Today, the Santa Cruz is concrete-lined in some of its reach through Tucson, and the surrounding riparian forests no longer exist. Similar photo points in Tempe document equally dramatic changes in the Salt River ecosystem. Arizona's desert rivers and the wildlife that depended on them evolved over many thousands and in some cases even millions of years. Man's activities in the past 150 years have greatly impacted and changed these river ecosystems. The words of Sadie Martin eloquently and personally chronicle these changes. After the catastrophic floods of 1890, she and her husband continued to farm their land along the Gila for another 7 years before moving on.
Years later, I had an opportunity to return to Arizona and visit some of the old familiar places. I was reminded of my early prophecy. Is there anything permanent on the beautiful desert? At Agua Caliente, I visited the little knoll where we buried our baby boy. I was not quite sure that I found the little grave, as many others had been placed around it. When we neared the location of our ranches, imagine my astonishment and bitter disappointment at not being able to find one of them. Not a tree, a fence post, or even the ruins of either house could be seen anywhere. Search as I did, I could see nothing but desert. What was the cause? I could not say. Perchance the river was in sympathy with the sandstorms and seemed, as I had said, to have a resentment for human beings who dared to come and change things for their own comfort and pleasure.
Only through examining and understanding our past can we ensure our future. Arizona's desert environment is a unique and fragile ecosystem. The people and wildlife that live here depend on these rivers for life. Our current and future actions will dictate the future of our desert rivers, our state, and the people and wildlife that live here.